Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Omega Metroid podcast. My name is Andy Spiteri, and I'm joined by Dak. How are you, man?
I am good, my man. Always good to be back talking some more Metroid, and this is a topic that I am very excited to talk about, so I'm glad we're getting right into this one pretty early.
Absolutely. After our first episode, I didn't realize that you were such a big Metroid Fusion fan.
Yes, I love Fusion.
So when I kind of posed this question, I was like, Dak is going to be fired up about this, and I'm gonna stroke your flames a little bit in this episode. I think I'm gonna try and get you going here.
Okay.
But like you said, let's just get into it.
Yes.
For the last, what would you say, 6 months, there's been a rumor of a new 2D Metroid game that's rumored to be a remake of Super Metroid. Now, my question is, does this game need to be remade, or let me rephrase that actually. My question is this: does Super Metroid or Metroid Fusion need a remake worse? Because I think that those are probably the next two games that are going to be given the Zero Mission Samus Returns treatment, if you will.
Right.
So I wanted to kind of pose that hypothetical. First, tell me what you think about the rumors of that Super Metroid remake, if you think there's any meat on the bone there, and we can kind of go from there.
Just to lay things on the ground flat first. As much as I want the one I think I want the most. I don't want any remakes. I'll just start right there. I don't want if I could be up to me very honestly, I don't want either a Super or Fusion remake. What I want is Metroid 5. Now, when I heard that rumor, like, oh, a new 2D Metroid, I also thought, yeah, they just made Samus Returns. They're probably going to remake Super or Fusion. But I also thought, oh, maybe it's actually Metroid 5. That'd be great. That being said, I would also love Metroid 5 in the style of Metroid Prime, but I don't think that's going to happen. All that being said, regarding whether, I want the game to be a Super Metroid or a Fusion remake, this is such a hard question for me because, again, I'm coming from it as I don't want a remake. So I'm thinking, well, if I have to have one, what am I looking for in a remake? Do I want
right? Actually, let me interject really quickly too, because I very much am also of the opinion where like I don't really like remakes. I think that games that need to be yeah. Like a game that needs to be remade and like it's virtually unplayable should be remade. Like a good example of this is if Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link was remade, that would be something I could get behind because playing that game in 2020 sucks.
Yeah.
But when they remade Link's Awakening, I was like, okay, like this is fine. But the original Link's Awakening is very much still a great playable game. So I think that both Fusion and Super are still great games. But let's look at this from the perspective of like, okay, we're probably assuming that there's going to be more Metroid remakes. What's the next game, and what does that look like, and which one do we think needs it more?
Yeah, and that's a good point because I feel like that's why Zero Mission and Samus Returns work really well because I don't think the first two Metroid games aged very well at all. Especially Metroid 2. I mean,
really? I was gonna say especially Metroid 1.
For me, I've always felt Metroid 2 is the weakest in the series. Metroid 1, I mean, it's right there for me. They're both games I don't have any intention of playing. Like, they're not, like, they did not age well, both of them. So Zero Mission and Samus Returns, I think, are great. But you make a great point. Like, a game that can easily be played right now because it's still a great game, why remake it? Or it doesn't necessarily feel like it needs to be remade. I feel that way about both. I feel that very much about Fusion because I feel like Fusion's a great game that works well. That being said, I think, a graphical upgrade would be great. I think Super Metroid would also obviously benefit from a modern graphical take. But do those games necessarily like need to be remade because you can't go and play them? Nah, you could re-release them because maybe they're not on the Switch or whatever it is. Well, I mean, Super Metroid is. I don't think Fusion is. But I know Super Metroid is. But like that's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, release on Fusion on my Switch. I don't necessarily need a remake. I would love a new game. I want a new one. That being said, if I had to pick one, Fusion is definitely my pick. Number one because it's my favorite.
Okay.
Number one, it's my favorite 2D Metroid. So if we're going that way, I'm gonna pick the one that I like playing the most. Second, I want Metroid 5 so much that if they're gonna make a Fusion remake, I know they're gonna add additional content, which I know would be they're gonna do because they did that for Zero Mission and Samus Returns. And if they're going to be making a Metroid 5, I would love some additional content and little updates to Fusion that would tie into the sequel that they're hopefully going to make. So I would love that. I think Super Metroid really kind of just needs like an HD remaster. I don't think it needs a remake. I don't think it needs like extra content or like kind of more like modern stuff added to it. I think it really is good as it is. And whereas Fusion, I don't think it needs that stuff either, but from a story perspective, I think would be great to have maybe a side like mission added to it or some other things that kind of enhance the experience and really lead into Metroid 5, which I think would be really cool. So that's my reasoning for why I would want one. Super Metroid, if it got remade, I think would be great because to see Super Metroid in 2020 or 2021, 2022 graphics would be awesome. I feel the same way about Fusion as well, but I like Fusion. That's my favorite 2D Metroid, so I would have to pick it on that scale. And also, as a lead into Metroid 5, I would love to see what they would do in terms of additional content, how they take the remake to lead into that game. So that's why I'd be interested with that.
Okay, that's a cool answer actually, because I was kind of thinking that you were going to side on the Super Metroid side. So, I say that mostly because I think that when people, and maybe it's just how I view remakes, but typically, when I think of a game that's being remade, and when I say remake, obviously I'm kind of like think Zero Mission to Metroid or Samus Returns to Metroid 2.
Mm-hmm.
I think that obviously not only does it get the graphical treatment, but like it just fixes some inherent problems. I'll use Link's Awakening as another example. Like in that game for the Game Boy Color, whenever you bump into a rock, text appears on the screen and it goes just hideously slow. So obviously they streamlined that. They streamlined a bunch of different buttons in that game, and now it's far more
Mm-hmm.
playable or accessible. So in that sense, I can see how some people would take a game being remade as kind of like a bad thing. I actually agree with you. I picked Fusion. I think that Fusion would be a better game to be remade because I think that it does have some problems that could be addressed with a remake. Not nothing inherently terrible, but I do think that Fusion has some issues that or some areas where it could improve. Whereas I mean, and we're gonna do an in-depth Super Metroid show at some point, I know, but like to me, this game is just so sound. It's so playable in 2020. I played it literally 3 weeks ago from start to finish. Just sat down, played, and it's just still it's so good. I would love to see a remake of this game with some shiny graphics and some new orchestrated music. I think that would be fantastic. I would pay full price for that, no problem. Do I think it absolutely needs it though? No. Do it, do I want a remake? Do I want a remake of either? No. But I do think that if we're going to give one of these games the remake treatment and hopefully come out with a better game, I think that Fusion has more issues that could be corrected with a remake. So that's my pick as well. So I guess we'll give Super Metroid its little bit of love and we'll focus on Fusion going forward here.
Yeah. That being said, I mean, I think Super Metroid definitely has stuff that could be fixed or upgraded or whatever. I think both of them definitely could stand to get a remake for sure. It's that it just I don't want a remake in general because I want a new Metroid game. Once there's a new Metroid
Right.
game continuing the plot, they can remake their both of them for all I care. I would love to see both of them remade. So I have no problem with the remake for either of them as long as I get Metroid 5 because that's what I really mostly care about. I think both games have a bunch of stuff that could be fixed and upgraded. I don't think actually either of them are very far in terms of like how much they need. Sure, Fusion does have some standout stuff that doesn't work, but I think Super Metroid kind of has that too, and isn't like super flawless and could stand to certainly be modernized a bit and remade a little bit and not just be remastered. Um, though I am interested because I have, unbeknownst to maybe the listeners, whoever that might be, your list for reasonings of why you would pick Fusion. And one of the things that you have written here, because this is something that I love about Fusion, is Samus's dialogue and her monologues to herself. That's one of my favorite parts about Fusion. So you have written down that you're not a fan of that. So I would love to hear why you're not a fan, because that's one of my absolute favorite parts of Fusion. So please go ahead if you don't mind.
I will absolutely do that. Actually, I do want to address one thing
Okay, sure, yeah,
before
sorry.
we get
Yeah.
going. Um, So, and this is, I have no idea how this would translate over to the Metroid kind of side of things, but a common misconception maybe, in maybe that's not the right word or not, but whenever we get a remake like Link's Awakening or Ocarina of Time 3D or Majora's Mask 3D, inevitably there's a lot of Zelda fans that are just like, oh man, like they're not, I just want a new Zelda game, like why are they working on a remake instead? Like I would say typically, like for all of those games, Nintendo had a studio called Grezzo that was separate from the main Zelda developmental team working on those remakes. So I would kind of think that like, it would be similar for Metroid if they were going to remake these games. I wouldn't even be surprised if if Grezzo got a crack at them, or I can't remember who developed Samus Returns off the top of my head, but that
That was
whoever
Mercury
is developing.
Steam something, right?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. So yeah, I feel like whoever's developing a remake maybe isn't working on the next Metroid. So I don't know that by like doing a remake you take away from the next game coming. But I definitely agree with you that if it was like the same developer, like just give me give me a new game for God's sakes, please. So going back to your original question, uh, maybe I wasn't fair with how I worded the my criticism of Samus's dialogue. Um, I do. I don't mind that Samus has dialogue, and actually, I think that you mentioned the scenes, especially in the elevators, where she's kind of contemplating to
I
herself.
love
I think that
those.
those are very, I think those are very effective. I don't know that I loved the dialogue between her and Adam, and that might have just been because at the time it was so startling. Maybe is the right word, just to see her uh, just speaking like that. We had heard Samus speak, of course, in Super Metroid, but not to that extent. Like I think when it
Hmm.
comes to talking with Samus, like less is more. So like you kind of, if there an advantage of doing a remake in this game is like maybe you can do a little bit more with her facials and like her expressions and stuff like that. I mean, obviously it's going to be a 2D game. I'm not expecting cutscenes, but like to me, just less is a little bit more of Samus. I think that it was too, and this is a problem that I think that Fusion has in general is like it's story driven and that's fantastic, but at times it's oppressively story driven, if
Hmm.
that makes sense to me. Like you kind of get the story at the expense of the exploration that Metroid to me is really famous for,
Hmm.
and that's the part to me that sells a Metroid game.
There's so much I have to say about what you just said. So first of all, going back to what you originally let off and how it was startling, that's interesting to me because we come from different eras of Metroid, right? Like you grew up with Super
Yes.
Metroid, Metroid Fusion and Prime were my first Metroid games simultaneously, right? So that wasn't startling to me because that was Samus. Like I played Fusion, she was talking. I'm like, okay, I'm playing Metroid Prime. I understood because you're playing first person. Kind of becomes like an avatar, right? Much like Link doesn't talk. You kind of are playing through vicariously through Link. Like
Right.
there's that kind of element to it in Metroid Prime. So she's not talking in that. Even though at the same time you see her eyes in the visor, you can hear her take damage and she grunts and all of that kind of stuff. But more or less, she doesn't talk and all that, so it kind of doesn't have that element. But in Fusion, you can hear she talks and talks to herself. She talks to the characters. So that's how I was introduced to Samus and Metroid. So for me, that was the norm. When I went to other games, Metroid Prime continued that she didn't really talk in Prime 2, but people talked at her, and in Prime 3 people talked at her, so like okay fine. And then other it's interesting that you said too where less is more, another thing, because I think Metroid Fusion is the less is more to me, because you look at like other M where Samus is just talking and talking and talking and talking and talking nonsense and nonsense and nonsense, and then you have the other side of the spectrum, which is other Metroid games where she says nothing at all. Fusion kind of hits in that middle area of she talks a little bit, not too much. It hits, and right there she is in that sweet spot of she's not talking too much, but we are seeing the side of her that kind of makes it so she is her own character. She's not just like an avatar or tool for the person playing the game. And that's what I loved about Fusion, because it did feel like less is more to me. I was like, oh, this is great. Like I get to see like what like I hear what Samus is thinking and like all of the situations and see you're reflecting in on that. And but it wasn't too much. Like not every scene had like a super long conversation. She's not talking on every elevator. Yeah, so it's interesting you say all that because that was kind of Samus to me. That's how she is to me at all. That's why I would love to have more of that. And that's what I love about Fusion because it gave us that insight into her psyche and her mind as she's just going through stuff. Whereas in Metroid Prime, you're just pretty much the walking tank and just mowing down nature without any regard and no thought and like reflection at all, which is fine. But it was a nice dichotomy there for me as a new Metroid fan, and that's what I really loved about it.
Yeah, and I think that really highlights like the point in the series where we got in. Because yeah, to me it was just kind of startling to see her talk that much. I mean, you mentioned Other M, that's a whole other can of
Yeah.
worms that we'll get into eventually. And everybody in that game talks way too
Mm-hmm.
much, more than they need to. Um, and this is another area that I think that by today's standard, a remake could help Fusion because on the Game Boy Advance, you have a very small screen, and thus, a lot of these cutscenes are, dialogue cutscenes. So you only have a very finite amount of space where you can have dialogue. So, like, getting through those scenes where Adam is telling you a lot, it takes a while.
Mm-hmm.
So you could do this one of two ways. I mean, the easy fix is like if this is on the Switch, which obviously it would be, then you have a lot more room to display dialogue. But you could also fix this issue and make it more engaging by just having full voice
Yep.
acting, which I hope that they would
Mm-hmm.
do. That's another reason that I think that that Fusion would be more of the select choice for a
Yep.
remake because there
100% agree.
is yeah, it's just there's no dialogue in Super Metroid, and this would be I mean, I guess let me retract that. There is, but
No,
not
but
much.
I see what you're getting at though. I mean, I 100% agree. I would love to have like scenes where Samus is arguing with Adam. Like this is like she's arguing about
Yeah,
and,
it
and,
could
and
just be
seeing it
so
in a
much more
full and
intense.
yeah, exact 100%. I want to see it animated like a full a full cutscene between these two and voice acted. Yeah, 100% agree. That's another reason I love Fusion is it has that not just the classic Metroid we kind of know about in the gameplay, but also those kind of story scenes that Super Metroid doesn't have. Which again is it's fine in its own experience and that it is what it is. But I love that about Fusion. And I would love to see the modern, fully animated or mostly animated, or whatever, voice acted, thrilling kind of cutscenes that Fusion has.
And so yeah, that's one of the big strengths that I think a remake could bring to Fusion, just making those cutscenes a little less oppressive to me because it does seem like to go from playing Super Metroid where you're free roaming pretty much all the time to going and playing Fusion where you go from point A cutscene, he tells you exactly where to go to point B, and it's another cutscene. I mean, there's so many different rooms that you got to go to get like a sector up and going. To me, it feels like it's a little bit too there's too much stop and start and not enough exploring. So I think a remake could maybe alleviate
Hmm.
that. Like maybe you just find Adam once per sector. He kind of tells you everything that you need to know, and that you go from there. I think that another issue that I have with Fusion um, is really you're not really free to go anywhere until the very late stages of the game. Like once you've been to most sectors and unlocked them and kind of explored them, you can't really go wander off and get lost into, a like an area that you're not supposed to be in yet. Like you can venture down
Hmm.
into Lower Norfair in Super Metroid, and you're not ready for that. And there is a certain point where you can't go any further. But like, I feel like Fusion is very much like Adam tells you go here, you go here, and then you go there, and then etc. etc. I think that like perhaps a remake could incorporate um, a little bit more interconnectivity in between sectors,
Hmm.
maybe a few more like secret passageways in between. I know that they exist, but like you don't have the equipment to do so or to access that until very late in the game. I think that that would help Fusion a lot for me as a fan of like exploration.
Yeah, the whole take and perspective on exploration with Fusion is certainly like one of the biggest things that's talked about when you bring up Fusion in general. Um, for me, I 100% agree. I would love to see a little more interconnectivity and kind of give Samus a little less restrictiveness in the ship. But when I played Fusion, it made sense, so I was always okay with it. Like she can't go everywhere; she's not equipped, or it's dangerous. That made sense that you were restricted a lot of the time, so that's okay. And
Right.
that being, for me, it was I like how you brought up, this place you're not supposed to be. In my interpretation, you're on the ship. Everywhere is you're not supposed to be. So every kind of place you go, it was explorative in that way. Like, sure, it's not a big open planet you're exploring, but every room you enter is going to be something that is going to might potentially kill you. You have no idea what's happening. Could be the SAX. You have no idea what it's going to be, and that's what I loved about it. It had a different kind of exploratory element to it, where it wasn't you're not literally exploring vast caves or whatever, but you're exploring this really, you know, even alien to you place, but in the same way familiar, which makes it like a twisted kind of reality that you're experiencing. And in that way, every kind of moment is very exploratory, even though, yeah, you're going through a corridor and you can't stretch your arms out, full wingspan or whatever. Like in that sense, you're not physically abounding on cliffs and hills and exploring these big vast areas, but it's still it was tense, and you really had to look around every corner with, you peeked instead of just kind of bullying and rushing through. And that's what I loved about Fusion too. And so I like how, you're looking at it that way. That's how I've always looked at the exploratory element of Metroid. Like, sure, it is restrictive in that way, but it still felt like an exploration. It was just a different kind to me, at least.
Yeah, and like again, it's very different. Like having on the heels of Super Metroid, where I think your advantage is kind of coming into that fresh with no really
Yeah.
predetermined expectations. I will say one thing that I think would be awesome in a Fusion remake is just the advancement with sound and sound engineering. Like
Mm-hmm.
the scenes where the SAX is chasing
Oh,
you or like you're in a room hiding from her, like those are just
so good.
so good.
Yeah.
Like the danger is just
Mm-hmm.
palpable. It's so intense, and I think that like the with today's sounds, like graphical upgrades, like those would just be even more awesome. I
Absolutely.
don't know. I was about to say I'd like to see more of that, but now that I'm saying that, I don't know that I would because those scenes are so good that I don't want them watered down.
Yeah.
But on the other side, I truly think that's like that's kind of the best part of Fusion to me is like when SAX
Oh, absolutely.
is hot on your heels and you're just like there's no way I can beat this thing. Like for the roles are reversed. Like normally you're the badass and you're hunting everything down and now you're being hunted. So I really do love that about Fusion. And I think
Absolutely.
like I would just love to see that again in more of a like in surround sound, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure. No, that was the sound design in Fusion is so good. You're hearing like the footsteps of the SAX against like the metal floor as it's
Yes.
walking through, and like that the
Oh,
ominous theme that plays because she's in the room and you're like, oh my god, damn it, and you're clenching. Um, yeah, absolutely, 100% agreed, and that again another reason I love Fusion. And yeah, I think going back to you said this much earlier in the episode where remakes are kind of looked at as like you do it for like bad games to make them good, whereas like if I really like a game but it's kind of older, could use a upgrade, I'd rather see that for a game I like than a game that, like, yeah, sure, it'd be great to be upgraded or whatever, but I'd really love it for a game I already kind of like, and I'd love to see this new take on it. So that's, again, Fusion is a game that I love a lot. It has a huge like place in my heart, and it is my favorite 2D Metroid. So if they're gonna remake it, at the end of the day, I think they're gonna remake both games. I think this is almost like a race that both people are gonna finish. So uh, the Fusion and Super Metroid inevitably are both going to get remade. Whichever one gets remade first remains to be seen. I think that's why maybe I'd like Fusion first so it could tie into Metroid 5. And then once, Prime 4's out, Metroid 5's out, Fusion Remake's out, they're like, all right, here's the big one, Super Metroid Remake, like blah, blah, which of course everyone will pop off for too whenever it comes out. I think that's the thing too, is they can keep that in the chamber loaded for a long time because people will pop out for that regardless. I think Fusion
100%.
remake
Yeah.
might timing wise might be better at certain times than others. So I think that's another reason why I'd like to see that. But yeah, I think both of us could go on and on about things we like about Fusion and wanting it, and especially a couple upgrades that make it feel a little less restrictive. Upgrading those moments with the SAX and whatnot. And even those scenes with dialogue, full voice acting, I think that'd be absolutely perfect for Fusion.
Yeah, and I don't want anyone to misconstrue what I'm saying is like that I don't like Fusion. I do like Fusion
No,
a
I think you
lot.
do.
I think that a lot of what Fusion did was what Other M was trying to do, but
Well,
just
yeah.
didn't pull it off successfully at
That,
all.
if anything,
Which
Other M is the Fusion remake. Like honestly, it almost is. It's like it really is kind of like a Fusion remake, but a bad one. If you think about it.
yeah, yeah, I can't wait. I know I say this every episode. I can't wait to talk about Other M, and we're gonna do that at some point. We're gonna get
Walmart
into
Other
Other
M,
M,
bro.
but yeah. So
Walmart Fusion.
I just think that this game for me was a little too story heavy,
Hmm.
but if there was a way that you could augment the story with voice acting instead of just having to scroll through text and text and text and text, I think that would really alleviate a lot of that pressure for me. And if you could just streamline the amount of encounters with Adam so that you don't have to go and talk to him twice basically in every sector, I think that would help a lot. And then really like I think you just add a little bit more interconnectivity and like it's perfect. It's totally I don't even want to say fixed because there's nothing wrong with Super Metroid or with Metroid Fusion, excuse me. It would make it more appealing to me, the player that started with Super Metroid, where you could go literally anywhere. So yeah, I think Fusion would be my pick for that. Here is a hypothetical question for
Hmm.
you, and I'm going to pitch you my idea before, and we'll see what you think about it. So when we've got the remake of Zero Mission and Samus Returns, we have that awesome post game content where like you're playing as Zero Suit Samus and you've got the baby Metroid floating around you. I think that there's probably no way that a Fusion remake doesn't have something similar. What do you think that extra content looks like? Now, this is my idea because I was spitballing to kind of come up with something. I was thinking that maybe you play as one of, or maybe even a few of the SAXs, and you are blasting away at those Metroids. I don't know if you could do that necessarily post game, but you could maybe like interject or like I don't know. You could maybe look at maybe you're like Adam and looking at security footage, and then you kind of take over playing from there of like him or of all the SAXs going ham on all the Metroids. I don't know. I thought that would be kind of neat if you kind of flipped it on its head and you're playing as the enemy who's not really the enemy in the end of the game. What do you think about that idea? Do you think it's any good, or like what would you kind of like to see for Fusion post game material?
Well, I think it's a good idea. Here's how I would do it. It wouldn't necessarily be post game, but you know how like I think it would be cool if it was like a separate multiplayer, not maybe not necessarily multiplayer, but it could be where like you face waves of Metroids as the SAX, and it's kind of like one of those side like horde modes where it's kind of that mode where you kind of see how many waves of Metroids you can withstand as you try to like destroy all of them in that sector. I think that'd be I don't know, that'd be kind of cool. Maybe it's not necessarily a post game mission, but it's kind of just like a scenario based thing, right? Like destroy all the Metroids in this section, blah blah, or survive as many Metroid waves as you can. And then like increasingly like an Omega Metroid shows up after a few waves or whatever it is, a queen like at the end. I think that would be really cool, like as kind of like a little twist on your idea, because I think that would be cool to play as the SAX and destroying all those Metroids. I like that idea.
That's what I thought. Like I remember playing Fusion for the first time, and when I saw the SAX, I was like, "Oh man, this is awesome!" Like the like I said earlier, like there I don't think is a single enemy slash creature in Metroid that has to me the same sense of danger that the SAX has. Like whenever the SAX is around, it feels like tense. Like you can cut the tension with a knife.
Oh yeah.
So I really loved that about the SAX, and I was kind of thinking like, okay, how could we work this in here where we can actually play as the SAX? So yeah, I mean I think that would be totally cool, and it would be nice to see a few more Metroids in Metroid Fusion because you really only get the small slice at the end with the Metroids.
Yeah, that's true. And I actually don't even have a huge problem with that, but yeah, any more like actual Metroid involvement, I think that'd be great, and that's why.
I actually I don't either, to be
Yeah,
honest. Just
but that's
yeah.
why I like the idea of like doing a Metro or like a multiplayer or like a side mode based on like fighting Metroid specifically. I think would be really cool. And considering Fusion doesn't really have too much of that, I think it would be a nice way to kind of supplement it a little bit. In terms of what I would want, even though now that you said your idea, I would want that too. So like count me in as being on that boat. Um,
I'll take it all.
yeah,
I want all of these
I
ideas.
think honestly for me it would have to be like some kind of post game mission that just leads into the story of the next game, and ideally some kind of chase. I would love a chase scenario against the Federation. That's what I want. Like that's what Fusion, the end of it's been teasing. That's what the whole like a latter half of the game is about. Is like setting up Samus versus the Federation. That's what I want so badly. Please just give me that. I want that right out of the gate. Like that's why again why I would love this remake, because I would love for them to be like, all right, we make this like Metroid Prime 4 comes out, boom, gangbusters, sells great, everyone loves it. They announce Metroid Fusion remake. Oh my god, so good. It comes out, and at the end there's that post game mission that leads right into Metroid 5, which they announce right after that. It'd be so sick, and that's what I like. I would love like a chase scenario or something like that just gets that's like immediately jumps right into that. I think that would honestly be my favorite thing, and maybe even a combination of that plus the Metroid Horde mode would, and then like some enhancements to Metroid Fusion, like graphical updates. I mean, that would be a perfect remake right there. That's a whole dang package for sure. So that's what I would do.
Here's another great thing about a potential Metroid Fusion remake. I would love to get a Fusion-Suit Samus amiibo.
Oh yeah, for sure. I love
Love
the Fusion
it.
suit.
Is there anyone else that you think they could make? I guess they could make SAX.
Yeah, but that's pretty much just various suit Samus. But they could do the monster SAX, with like the final form. That'd be a
Yeah, they could
cool
do that.
That would be a sick amiibo. That would honestly be like, it would be like a bigger one. Like that would be awesome, I think.
I can see the Fusion-Suit Samus amiibo on my counter right now though, and I pick Fusion just for that reason alone right there. Although it would be pretty cool if we got some of the like Ridley,
I was gonna say,
Prey,
you were talking
Mother
about
Brain
Crate earlier.
amiibo.
I would imagine you'd want a Crate amiibo.
I mean, I do actually. Our friend over at the Metroid database has this. I believe it's Ryan who has this. He has this awesome Kraid statue that I'm super jealous of, and I want to steal from his house. But that's neither here nor there. It's really awesome. You should check it out on Instagram if you can find him over there at the Metroid database. But yeah, I mean, I would just I'm a sucker for anything Metroid, like amiibo. Hook it to my veins. I would
Mm-hmm.
love it.
No.
But yeah, I think that that post scene or that post game content would be really cool. Like we have kind of been teasing the Samus versus the Federation for God almost 20
I'm
years now.
saying it'll be
So
20 years
it's
next
it's
year.
time to
Like, what
pay
is it?
up.
That's what I'm saying. Like, that's why I want the game to come out. I'm like, dude, I'm sick of the remakes. I want Metroid Prime 4, but even then, I was like, come on, like, continue the story, like, please, like, it's literally left on a cliffhanger, for the most part. It's like, what's gonna happen next? And then they don't tell us. So I'm like, I want to know. Like, I've lived so much of my life waiting to find out what happens. You've set it up. You've got all this build up. The game was great. The build up is it's set up. I mean, you couldn't have set up really any better. To be honest, I think how Fusion ends is so good, and how like I know you say like it is very story based and like going from Super Metroid. That's definitely like a startling thing. But for me, I love the Fusion story. So like when it's like towards the end of the game and like Samus is like catching on to their BS and is like, all right, like it's gonna be like, me and you versus you guys, and is realizing that, and like it's coming to fruition, and that's building, and it finally happens, and like you get like that side conversation with Adam and the Federation guy, and like all this stuff. I'm like, oh, this is so good, and then it just comes to a screeching halt because they don't continue it. Whereas like Super Metroid doesn't have that quality to me, because like the story of Metroid is a big reason why I like Metroid. I love the story of Metroid, even if it's like compared to other
Right.
games and even non-Nintendo games where it's compared to story-driven games, it pales in comparison. But what is this? What is made of the story? What the story ends up being for what it is, I do love. So that's the reason why I love Fusion. because it has a great story. I love the story, and I want to see it continued. So that's where in my camp. Super Metroid doesn't have that quality to me because it doesn't have really it has a bare bones, barely a
It has a
story.
different approach where like the story is told
It
through the
has a
gameplay.
narrative, but I wouldn't say it has a story. You know, it has.
Yeah, and actually, Metroid Prime is kind of like the same way with that almost, where like Metroid Prime, you kind of make the story by scanning stuff. It has a bare bones story, but it's up to you to kind of uncover that. Metroid's story typically is just so unconventionally told that to me, that maybe that's why Fusion is a little odd to me and why I just don't like Other M at all because it's very much a straightforward narrative, and in Other M's case, it just beats you over the head with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I totally am digging what you're saying. Like it is, at least Fusion is storytelling done right.
Right. Yeah. Like Other M could have been done right. It just wasn't. Like but it is like I said, it's like a Walmart Fusion. It's a bad Fusion remake. Like they take so many elements from Fusion and just do them poorly. Um, yeah. Again, we'll talk about that. But yeah, Super Metroid. It doesn't. It does have a story, but Metroid Prime, I think, it still felt a little more story like based ish. Even though, yeah, a lot of what you learn is through the lore and scanning the lore, and and that's actually a kind of a good point. You kind of make the story yourself because it's really based on how much you scan. And that really does affect how much you understand what's happening. But at the same time, it did feel like there was more
Mm-hmm.
of a flow of a story in Metroid Prime, whereas Super Metroid kind of feels more like Breath of the Wild, where it's you kind of just dropped into this place like you have an end goal.
Yeah, that's a
You're
good
gonna hit you're
comparison
gonna
to
hit
make.
these points along the way, and then you're gonna reach your goal. Whereas Metroid Fusion certainly isn't like that. It's very much a straightforward narrative, which I love. Straightforward narratives; they're great. And then
This will surprise you, but actually, my favorite Zelda game, or one of my second favorite Zelda game, is Skyward Sword, which again has a very straightforward point by point narrative. So it's funny that I like that in Zelda, but I'm not in love with it with Metroid.
see with Skyward Sword is probably one of my least favorite Zeldas, just because it's like a Wiimote Zelda. Um, But to be fair, I didn't give it too much of a chance. I feel like I got to give it more of a chance. The Wii remote and the motion controls really turned me off from it, and I feel like the story is probably more than fine. Like I said,
Oh, the
yeah,
story's
I would love to
fantastic.
give it a try.
It's really good.
So that's the
That's a very apropos point that you made though. Super Metroid is very much like Breath of the Wild in that it has a start at the beginning. You have your story set up for you. You go through the whole game, then you have an end where you have the story kind of taking place at the end, and there's not really a whole lot in between. That's very,
yeah, exactly.
very like it's a good
Whereas like
comparison.
Metroid Prime, it's like that, but there are like sections in between. You get the Findrana drifts, and you see Ridley fly over. You get, you can sequence break, but like more or less you are kind of, you go to the Chosen Ruins, and you're going to Magmore, you're going to Fendrana, you're going, eventually to the pirate area and all that, and then you go down to the cavern where, yeah, like you said, Super Metroid's like it's front and stories at the beginning, and then you wander around happens, and then story happens at the end. Metroid Prime, it has story then exploration, story then exploration, story then exploration, story then exploration. And then Fusion is obviously a fusion of that, really, where it's story and exploration or whatever gameplay are happening really at the same time, and are fused together in a way. So I think that's a cool way of looking at the games in that kind of manner.
Well, I guess we didn't really give Super Metroid its due. The question was what needs a
That's
remake
true.
more, Super Metroid or Metroid Fusion? But I think that we're both in agreement that it's probably Fusion. So, I mean, both games are good as is. There's no doubt. I think that Super Metroid to me is I hesitate to use the word perfect, but if I was going to use the word perfect, like Super Metroid to me is almost a perfect video game that doesn't really need a whole lot else added to it. Even graphics, I think that the presentation is still awesome. So, you know, um, watch that be the one that gets announced though. Maybe there's smoke to that fire about the rumored
I
Super
would
Metroid
not be
remake. Who
surprised,
knows?
man. I can easily see it being the Super Metroid remake, and if it is, I'll be just as excited.
Yep, I wouldn't be mad either. Definitely, any Metroid is good Metroid. That's kind of the running thing on this show. By God, any Metroid is good Metroid.
Man,
Almost any
that's the
Metroid.
again, hey, like last time you're like, hey, they couldn't possibly mess it up. I'm like, any Metroid's good Metroid. I want some here. My stance is I'm ready for some good Metroid, and I know it's possible. And honestly, I am hopeful. I think we're at a great time for to be a Metroid fan. I feel like there's no better time to be a Metroid fan than right now in terms of the past forever. To be honest, I mean, you got some love in Smash. You've got Metroid Prime 4 on the way. Samus Returns was a really great game. I think this is a great time to be a Metroid fan. So for the most part, I am with you there. Any Metroid's good Metroid, but at the same time, I'm ready for the good Metroid that I'm very confident is on the way.
As long as we don't get another Other M, I'm okay. As long as we don't get Other M2, I'm okay. I know you'd love that.
If they announce Other M2, oh my god, I would.
If they announce Other M2, this podcast is over.
I would be like, hey man, like it was a good run, but
I'm sorry, but I'm not a Metroid fan anymore.
I just can't support the direction. But yeah, I don't think it'll come to that. I'm very confident. I think that we're gonna be in like a platinum era of Metroid. If you consider maybe like the golden age of Metroid being when we had like Prime and Fusion and Prime 2 and Hunters and Pinball and yada 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 and all this stuff, which is what I think is pretty accurate of it being. I think we're in a new era of that. I think we survived the Dark Ages. It's time to rejoice. Our loyalty will pay off. We're going to get some good games. So I don't think like any Metroid, good Metroid. I think the Metroid we're going to get is going to be good, and I can't wait to play it.
There you go. I am 100% in agreement. I do hope that we get some Metroid news soon via either a Nintendo Direct. Hopefully it's Metroid Prime 4 or Metroid 5, but if it's a remake, to hold us over until then, I'm perfectly fine with that too. That's it. That's all. That's our thoughts about the remake for Fusion, a potential remake for Fusion, potential remake for Super Metroid. We want to know what you think. What game deserves, or not deserves, but what game needs the remake treatment more? Which game could benefit more from it? Super Metroid or Metroid Fusion? Let us know over on Twitter at Omega Metroid Pod. Tweet at us. Let us know, of course. You can also tweet at us ourselves on Twitter. I am at Spiteri316 and Dak is at the Rapture _. Before we get out of here, Dak, any final thoughts? Anything that you wanna to plug on the way out?
I just want to say again that I hope I agree with you. I think we're gonna get some Metroid news. I really think that we're due for something. Maybe not a full trailer, but at least a bit of a teaser, more than just a couple seconds, and I'm really excited. I can't wait to eventually talk about it. On Twitter at the Rapture _, also on Twitch at the Rapture. Well, the Rapture _. So feel free to check me out there. I definitely want to play some Metroid. We should play some Metroid on Twitch together. I think that'd be a great time. Maybe
I think
the Other M run.
Yeah.
I think that has to happen, and we do some commentary on Other M. I think that'd be great. I think there's a lot of potential there, a lot of possibilities. So yeah, I would love. We should definitely do that. And this was great talking about these games. Would love a remake of both of them. We'll see what we get this year. I think it'll be a good year for Metroid, as it's been a good year for Metroid the past couple of years, I think.
That's right. Well, we should definitely do that. Somebody's got to play Other M, and we know it's not going to be you. That's going to do it for us, guys. Of course, we want you to head over to Podbean and iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe to the Omega Metroid podcast. Leave us a 5-star review if you think we earned it. And, of course, recommend the show to any Metroid fans in your life going through withdrawal from the lack of Metroid news, games, whatever. Tell them about the Omega Metroid podcast. That's the best thing you can do for the show, is spread the good word. We are a Metroid show by the fans, for the fans. So, tell the fans in your life where they can get their Metroid fix. Until next time, again, I am at Spiteri316. Dak is at the Rapture _, and it is at Omega Metroid Pod. That's it. That's all. We will see you guys next mission. See you later.